Hello everyone, my name is Sarah Cahill and welcome back to my channel. It might not ever seem like it, but trying to find a way to outline and draft a novel that works for you is a very difficult thing to do. I've been trying to find a way that suits my motivation or constant lack thereof for a very long time, and I think that I have finally found it. So today I'm going to share with you the process that I used for drafting my newest novel, Project Mystic. I finished Project Mystic about a week ago and it didn't take me as long as I thought it would to actually finish it because of the size of the project that I thought it would be in my head. I think I overestimated how difficult it would be to write, but I think part of the reason I ended up overestimating is because of the way that I actually ended up drafting it, which just took so much of the pressure off the physical act of writing this novel. I procrastinate, I don't have a lot of motivation nowadays, so I make it a habit to never do a first draft outside of any of the nano months. So April, July and November really are the only 3 months of the year that I will ever draft something new. The rest of the year tends to be spent on revision, because once I've written the first draft is done. That's the majority of the initial hard work, and without the deadlines of 50k in 30 days, I tend to find it difficult to actually force myself to write. That didn't happen with Project Mystic. It was the first time since the very first novel that I wrote, which took me 3 years. I actually wrote a project outside of the nano months. There was no deadline forcing me to finish. I had no set word count that I needed to achieve. There was nothing for me to win. And yet somehow I managed to write 79,000 words. I managed to finish this entire novel in 43 days between the 5th of April and the 14th of June. I did not expect this. I'm very pleased. It was a real eye-opener into the way that I had been doing things previously. And it was a type of eye-opening moment that sort of made me go, this is how I'm going to draft for the rest of my life. Key to this drafting is drafting in scenes. Now, drafting in scenes is not a new thing. It's been around for a while. Lots of people do it. I have attempted to do it in the past with post-it notes following the 60 scenes method. It always sort of fell short. I always did something wrong and it never tended to work for me. But for some unfathomable reason, I decided I would outline in scenes for Project Mystic. And I think it spurred from the fact that I had an idea for the first scene in my head. I wanted to write it down, so I made some notes on Google Docs about how I wanted this scene to go. And then when it came to actually writing the scene, I wrote the scene a good couple of weeks, I think, before I officially started writing the rest of it. And I thought, you know what, I don't know how to continue this scene. I don't know how to finish this chapter. So then I thought to myself, I'm just going to leave it as a scene, and then I'm just going to do another scene for chapter 1, and that can finish off the first chapter. And then from there I thought, you know what, I'm just going to stick everything into scenes. And that was the best spur of the moment decision of my entire life. Let me tell you how easy it is to write when you're only just focusing on scenes. How much pressure it took off of me knowing I didn't have to write at least 3,000 words for this chapter. I just needed to write a scene. That was the only thing I had to do. That was the one thing I had to focus on. I didn't have the whole, oh, I need to write an entire book. Oh, I need to write an entire first act. Oh, I need to write a whole chapter. I just need to write a scene. And that was the key into making me finish. That was the key into giving me the motivation, the inspiration and the drive in order to finish this in such a short amount of time off of my own back. Before I get into the actual logistics of how I drafted, which is the fun part, I want to quickly talk about my Scrivener setup for Project Mystic, which I'm adapting and taking over to Abingdon House 3 when I start writing that next month for Camp NaNoWriMo. I reckon you can use any type of outlining method in order to do this drafting process. I used Katie Tastic's 3-act, 9-block, 27-chapter method for Project Mystic. I'm using Save the Cat for Abingdon House 3, so we'll see how well it works. But really the key is to just push everything into a scene. It sounds so simple, yet for some reason it just never clicked with me before now. This is the setup that I had for Scrivener in order to do all of the drafting. There are a lot of folders, but that helped keep me extremely organized, so yay for helpfulness. So as per the Katie Tastic method, it's split up not only into acts 1, 2 and 3, but each folder for the acts has its own folder within it for the blocks. Block 1, 2 and 3 for Act 1, and so on and so forth. Within each block are folders for each of the chapters that occur within each block. So block 1 has the introduction, the inciting incident, and the fallout. Within each of these folders, like I said, there's a lot of folders, are 2 separate documents for the 2 scenes. So each and every single chapter folder has 2 scenes inside it. So each of the folders for the chapters are all laid out exactly the same. So chapter 1 is here with its 2 scenes. They are all color coded. I have a very brief outline of what occurs in the scene at the front. Usually when I'm outlining, I have 2 separate sort of manuscripts. I have my outline manuscript and I have my I'm writing manuscript. So then I'll cut the page in half and I'll have my outline on this side from one file, and then I'll have what I'm currently writing on this side. I didn't want to do that this time because it tends to put too much here on this side. There's too much for me to look at, too much for me to go through. So instead what I did, and let me find a scene. If we go to build up, if we go to scene 26, you'll see over on this side here, I have my very random notes at the top, and then here I have in the notes all of the outline that I need in order for me to write the scene, which was very, very helpful to have it there instead of having it on a big separate page. Now I have 5 main POVs for Project Mystic, which made the initial setup for Scrivener a little bit difficult because I hadn't outlined the plot enough for me to know who I wanted where, who was going to be the best voice in order to tell this part of the story. So I did it backwards. Tala is the main protagonist, so I wanted her to go in all of the important places. I color coded for the very opening chapter. I color coded what I wanted to be the big moments, especially in Tala's character arc, as well as the plot, like the darkest moment, like the climax. I picked all of her chapters first, and then everyone else, the rest of the 4 characters, I just stuck in random places. Made sure that within each block there was no reoccurring POV, that there were 3 different ones, and then I just tailored the plot around where I had stuck all of these character POVs, and it was as simple as that. Because while I outlined technically, I also pantsed a heck of a lot writing this novel, and this next part is what helped me pants this so much, which also helped me a lot more than I thought it would into getting this thing finished. So I have my outlining method done, I have my Scrivener set up, I have all of my chapters color coded. I have decided more or less what needs to happen within each beat, despite the fact I haven't quite decided what needs to happen within each scene, and then the fun began. Because apart from the very first scene, which was scene 1, and the very last scene, which was scene 54, which I wanted to write first and last in order to sort of preserve that feeling of beginning and end, I did not pick any of the scenes that I wrote. My friends did. Project Mystic was written completely non-chronologically. I made sure that I wrote the acts chronologically. I wrote all of Act 1 first, then I wrote all of Act 2, and then I wrote all of Act 3. Because I didn't want to write scene 1 and then end up writing scene 42, especially when I had no idea what the plot was going to be in the middle. But within those acts, the scenes, minus the number 1 and number 54, were completely written out of order. Let me show you. So here is the entire general stats breakdown of me writing Project Mystic. 43 days at 79,000 words exactly. These are all of the scenes that I wrote and their word count. And this lovely little thing down here is the order in which I wrote every single scene. So you can see scene 1 was first, obviously, then scene 7. And I didn't get to write scene 2 until all the way over here. We've written chapter 19 here, chapter 29 here. We've skipped most of the 30s and gone straight to 34, 36 before we managed to go back down. And by some piece of luck, last 4 scenes I wrote happened to be in order at 51, 52, 53 and 54. It was so much fun shouting into the void in Discord, DMing people, shouting into random live streams that I happened to be attending. Do you want to pick this next scene that I'm going to write? And then whatever scene that they picked, I wrote it. There was no time for me to fumble about. There was no time for me to go, oh no, I don't know what I'm going to put in this scene. I just had to write it because that was my accountability. That was my promise to the person who had picked this scene. I will write this scene next. And because I didn't have that much of a plot, because only a slight majority of the scenes within each act had an actual outline to it, and it was a very brief outline, I very much ended up pantsing what happened in that scene as long as this main event occurred. Now, when I initially started, all 27 chapters had a very brief outline of what needed to happen within that chapter. That changed when I split it into scenes because the main event would go into one of these scenes and would leave the other scene blank. So then I either had to split the main event up over the 2 scenes, or on the fly, when that scene was picked, come up with what happened in that scene. So all of the main beats were very much outlined and planned, and everything in the middle was pantsed. There are so many occasions where character development pops up out of nowhere, plot threads appear in Act 3, subplots come and go randomly. Because I would come up with a certain plot thread while I was writing, say, Freya in Act 2, that I hadn't even mentioned or thought about throughout the entirety of Act 1. The thing is, when you're writing in just scenes, especially if you don't have a really, really strong outline for each of these scenes, it lets you be imaginative, it lets you be creative, it sort of helps gives you inspiration. It sort of helped take away the whole, oh, I don't want to write this scene because it's a boring scene, I just want to get to the exciting scene. Because it wasn't outlined that much, I could make it as exciting or as boring as I wanted it to. All I had to do was focus on this one event. This is the only thing that I need to write. And because I'd broken everything up into such bite-sized pieces, because I was literally just focused on this one scene and what needs to happen in this one scene so I can write this one scene and move on, it took away so much of the pressure. It felt sort of like this was the only thing that I had to do. I don't have to write an entire book. I need to write this specific event. And not only did I write the entire book non-chronologically, I also wrote each scene non-chronologically as well. Most people will start at the beginning of the scene and then continue writing until they reach the end of the scene. I did not do that. I got to my scene, I would look at the notes I had for the outline for that scene, and I would start wherever I wanted to. If I didn't have any idea what was going on, I would take the little bit that I had outlined, that might be a couple of sentences of dialogue, it might be a specific moment that happened, and I would start there. And I would write until I was no longer inspired to write that particular part, and then I would move on, whether that was going back up to the beginning, whether that was writing how I wanted the scene to end, and then I would fill in the gaps. I think at one point for one scene, I had 16 different snippets from beginning to end of random pieces of dialogue, someone approaching somewhere, a random description of a setting or an action that they were doing. All of these little snippets I sort of came up with as I was writing, but it didn't fit with what I was currently writing, so I put it somewhere else. And then all I had to do once all of these little pieces were written was just to join them together so they formed some sort of coherent scene. Which again took a lot of the pressure off because I wasn't sitting there forcing myself what needs to come next after this piece of dialogue. I would just go straight to what I was inspired to write, the bit in my head that I knew I wanted to write, but it came a lot later. I let my mind and my fingers write whatever the hell my brain was thinking without limiting myself to writing something that I wasn't sure about. I do hope all of this makes sense. There were some times where I would write the second scene in a chapter before I wrote the first one. There are points where I would write chapter 9 before I wrote chapter 7 or 8. I had to keep checking to make sure that the plot had some consistency and that characters weren't talking about an event that doesn't happen for another 3 chapters because I wrote that one first. But it also meant that I could go backwards and forwards and add little bits of foreshadowing or payoff to plot points I would come up with in scene 17 that I could hint at in scene 6. Do the scenes and chapters feel a little disjointed? Probably. Is the overall plot strong and make sense? That's debatable. That's only because of the random plot threads I added in the wrong places. But it does give me a fantastic starting point when it comes to revisions. I have all of the things I need there. I know the character development that I need to add. I know the things I need to include in my revisions in order to resolve certain subplots or character arcs. I already know that the ending needs to change and how I want it to change. I know that there are moments missing in between scenes, little snippets of events that would be very helpful for the audience to see. But because I used the Katie-tastic outlining method, I couldn't quite fit it in where I needed to. Writing this way, writing in scenes to make everything seem smaller and more manageable, not picking the scenes I write to sort of involve and engage my writing community a little bit more, pantsing the majority of everything to keep the plot fresh and creative and to keep me entertained, all helped into creating what I hope at least is a very, very strong first draft, which has all the elements I want to include and only a little bit of work in revisions in order to get it done. So that's everything for this video. Let me know down in the comments below, do you have any specific ways that you draft your novels? Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in my next video. Good thoughts and happy writing.